Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here from the Child Protection Party. This is, as always, a very special occasion just to have a conversation with you and talk about things that are concerning CPP and the people that support us. So welcome to this particular live feed. Tonight we're going to talk about the mental well-being of children and young people. And the reason why we're talking about this specifically is because it is something that's concerned me and the party for a long, long time. We'd be interested in any feedback you can offer, any statements you can make in relation to your own understandings around what it is like for young people to live in the world today. Now, for us, young people and suicide and mental well-being, depression, anxiety and stress are issues which are not addressed as they should be by Parliament, by political parties, by the governments in general. And it's about time that we started to consider addressing these issues because they are of primary concern, not just because we want to see young people not have to go through some of the traumas that they do and meet the sort of mental well-being issues that they have, but because young people, if they have these issues when they're young, they transport those issues into their daily life as adults. It affects every aspect of their life, the way they deal with their friends, their relatives, their acquaintances, and particularly the most important relationships that they have, their partners. So we wish to address these particular issues and wish to talk about them quite openly and frankly. And we've got a couple of examples today about where these issues have come to the fore and the way they impact young people also. I know statistics can be rather boring for a lot of people, but it's important to us to understand the depth of the problem and the fact that governments in general do not address it. Child protection is not about just protecting children who are taken into care. Child protection is about looking after and caring for all those children who are in need of care, and that is most children. Some children grow up in some pretty crappy households and they need protecting from those households. Some children just grow up in environments where they're bullied, where there's domestic violence and where there's no interference from child protection services. There are some children who grow up with intellectual disabilities, who are challenged intellectually, who struggle at school and can't seem to develop reading and writing skills that are going to help them later on in life. It is important for all of us to understand that there are many of these children out there and they need our help and they need our support. And the Child Protection Party is about filtering all decisions through the eyes of a child, keeping in mind that that child will also grow up to be an adult and we want them to be the best functioning, the most productive adult that they can be. But we need to look at the problem. And the problem primarily is that the services which need to be offered to young people are not there, right across the board, from disabilities, NDIS, through to teaching aids and to other forms of intervention that are required in help children, particularly amongst the mental health structures within our society that don't provide the funding and the staffing to help children that are in need, and the type of staffing that is required as well. We need more mentoring systems whereby young children can be mentored by adults or other young people who seem to have a handle on life and who can talk to them about the issues that they're facing. Young children in particular need to have someone in their life that they can trust. Unfortunately, that is not often their parents nor their siblings. Sometimes the most important person that we have in our life sits outside our family. I know from my own experience, the most important person I ever had in my life was a teacher when I was at school. He mentored me, he encouraged me, and he is a man that, in terms of the way I viewed my world, I see it through his eyes often, because he was able to help me to accomplish a certain sense of self that I would never have accomplished anywhere else. So sometimes there are these other people, and we need to be able to make sure that young people have the opportunity to connect with them. So how deep is this problem? How far does it go? And are we able to resolve it? I have a couple of items or newspaper items that I'd like to refer to. Recently, the ABC did a session, have put out a survey called Australia Talks. In that survey, they've come up with a number of data, statistics, I guess, that indicate the way mental well-being is affecting kids. So I'd like to just raise and talk about some of those issues. We have here, I've got to get rid of me on the screen, that's a bit embarrassing. We have here, if I can just find it, this is the one. So this is an article which came out in the ABC News actually. Young people are struggling the most with their mental health. And it's important for us to understand that this is a subject that we need to find the space to direct our attention. If it wasn't an issue, then obviously surveys like this wouldn't indicate that it was. Here's what they asked. Here's what they learned from asking about this. So they talk about this Finlay Hewlett, who I assume they're just providing as an example of someone who has experienced mental wellbeing problems. And her case, I guess, is pretty typical of most young people. Finlay Hewlett was just 8 years old when she first started experiencing anxiety and depression. One of the questions I think that we need to be asking ourselves is, at what age do children start to experience sadness and depression? I've heard of children as young as 4 and 5 attempting suicide. Now, what's happening to these kids that causes them to be so traumatic, I wonder about, and whether that has ever been addressed for those kids. But it happens sometimes at a very early age, particularly when kids are trying to make sense of their world, trying to understand where they fit. And if they've experienced trauma, if they've been put down and degraded in some way, obviously that's going to impact them. And if it happens at a very early age, then it's going to impact them later in life. So we need to make sure that services are provided, particularly, I think, for young people, particularly very young people, so that they can have those issues addressed. So early intervention is primarily important in this space as well. She says that I felt like I was going to collapse. My body would entirely shake and convulse. I was not able to breathe. My arms and legs would go numb. I'd feel like I was about to die, or that my worst fear had come true. Now 19, Finn has been navigating her mental health, the support systems available to her, and the social stigma that comes with all that for almost a decade. And she's not alone. And I think that's important to identify, is that there are so many people like Finlay who are experiencing mental health issues, and they don't have the people around them that understand what's happening for them. That often we hear people talking about the loneliness and the isolation associated with struggling with mental well-being. As we all know, if you injure yourself, you break a leg or sprain a leg or whatever, then that is something that's easily identifiable. We can see it. We can put it up on a chart. We can do an X-ray. We know what's happened to you. But with mental illness, it's just a wee bit different. We can't. It's really about the way someone's interpreting their experiences and how they feel about them. So we need to become more and more alert. And I think over the years, in recent times, through Adam Goods and through other people, we've been able to hear about how sports people have experienced their mental well-being and how they've been able to cope or not cope with that on occasions. So we're becoming more and more aware of the problem. But the question really is, are we finding ways to address it? And the answer to that is probably not. So it goes on to say in this article, according to Australia Talk survey, it's young people like Finlay who are struggling the most with their mental health. Across almost every mental health related question in the Australian Talks National Survey 2021, young people came off worse. The survey found people under 30 were much more likely to rate their mental health as poor than older Australians. And I think this is sad. There was a positive aspect of this, and I think it was that they noticed that as people became older, that's kind of like a different generation again, but as people became older, their mental well-being was not as significant to them. And one thing I'm questioning is, do we have a generation now, because of the pandemic and the impact that that's had on them, if that has exacerbated their mental well-being, and whether that will be a flow-on effect into adulthood, which will produce a different set of statistics in 15 or 20 years' time, because the issues that those young people have now have not been resolved. So we are at a point where it's really important for us to find ways to meet the needs of young people so that the mental well-being issues that they have don't escalate. It goes on to say, 1 in 5, 19% of those aged 18 to 24 rated their health as poor, and 16% of 25 to 29 said the same. A third in each of these age groups say the mental health is fair. So what that's telling us is there's a lot of people, a lot of young people who are suffering from mental well-being issues, which I think when we look at the number of young people there are would exceed more than 1 million young people. So this is an issue that we really need to address. We need to address it now. We'd be interested to know what you're thinking about this and whether or not this is something that needs to be addressed. There was another article here. So this was by the Australian Institute of Health and Wellbeing, and this is worth noting as well. I might have to set this up a wee bit differently on my screen because I don't know if you can see it all. But I'll read out the best that I can. So it says here, youth is a key transition period in a person's life. It's kind of what I've already been saying. When young people are in good health, they are more likely to be active, better educated out, and have better educated outcomes, make a successful transition into full-time work, develop healthy adult lifestyles, and experience fewer challenges, forming families and parenting. A recent survey of youth found that physical and mental health was highly valued by young people, with a majority regarding it as extremely or very important. And there's a graph here, and it starts just looking at the males. So this is an opportunity for us to have a look at where do mental well-being sit in terms of gender. In the males, and I was surprised to hear this anyway, is that suicide and inflicted injuries comprise 12.8% of the leading causes for burdens amongst males. Alcohol was 7.1, road traffic offences often up for guys, and depressive orders were around 5.4, back pain and problems 5.1. But when you look at women, so I'm concerned about this in males. Why is it that males' percentage of suicide ideation perhaps is extremely high, and in females it tells us something a wee bit different? So it says that, oops, didn't come up. We will try again. So it says here that, that where the males were at 12.5 for suicide, anxiety disorders were high for women. Depression orders were 8.9, asthma, back pain problems 6, and suicide ideation is half that of men. So this also tells us that there's an issue for us to deal with the way men approach mental health, the issues that sit within guys' lives, and I'll give a whole talk about where those issues live, because firstly I'm a male, and secondly I've been working in that area for 30 years. So we know that is a distinct problem. And I guess one of the issues, the primary concern that we all should have, is that these issues are not being addressed. That young men in particular are finding there's a lot of stress and strain on their lives, that there's a sense of hopelessness, helplessness and powerless, which often brings about bad behaviour, which causes them to have bad relationships later on in life. And that in itself is another issue, and particularly around domestic violence. So there's plenty of issues here to be addressed, and I'll just come back to our Facebook page. I'll just have a look at what some of you have said. We've had a few people. So we've got Jackie, who's on our team, has chimed in, and that's an interesting issue. There is, as I was saying before, it's easy to identify when there's a problem around your physical well-being, but when there's a problem around your mental well-being, it's so harder to identify. And it's really about the way we interpret our life. So, and there's a stigma attached to that, because in our society, we should all be strong, we should face up to our issues, and we should deal with them. But there are people who there are issues which are really difficult for us to face up to. Childhood sexual abuse clearly is one. Rape is another. Violence in the home and how that affects young children is another. None of these issues are the child's fault. They weren't created by the child, they're created by the adults around them. So, and then it becomes, and this is the distressing thing, I think, it becomes the child's problem as the child grows up and has to deal with how those traumas impacted them. The people often that cause those traumas possibly have left their lives and perhaps are no longer there, but they still have to find a way to resolve them. They have to find a way to confront them. Confronting a problem which you didn't cause doesn't mean that you have to take responsibility for that problem. Quite the opposite. What it does mean is you need to understand how that problem has impacted you and what you can choose to do about it, given that it wasn't your problem in the first place. But it is also about those people that caused the problem taking responsibility for the damage that they've done to the kids that are manifesting depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and perhaps, regretfully, even suicide at the end of the day. So, and it just reminded me of a good example of that is the robo-debt problem that the federal government have just been confronting, where they failed to take responsibility for the damage that they've done to millions of people around Australia, and that the issue was around suicide, those people that committed suicide because of that. And I think Dutton simply said, well, they obviously have complex lives, not that we're taking responsibility for it. And I think there comes a time when if you damage somebody, if you acknowledge the harm that you've done to somebody else, that one of the best things in the healing process is to admit to it and then help that person overcome whatever it is, the damage that you've done to them. I've often said to parents as part of my counselling process is one of the greatest things you can ever do for a kid is to ask them how you were as a parent, what was helpful, what was unhelpful. So confronting the way we were and how we've impacted others is a really helpful process. But we as a society just don't do that. It's like we don't care about what happens to others. If we step away from it, ignore it, hopefully it will all go away, even though we leave the trail of damage behind us in terms of the people that we've damaged. Leslie, rightfully so, poor mental health is a huge issue in adopted persons. So anybody that's had an out-of-care experience, that is no longer living with their biological parent, that in itself is often traumatic for a variety of reasons. May have had trauma before that, may not have been any trauma from leaving their biological parents, and a larger trauma for a lot of kids is being separated from their siblings as well through that process or through any process. It's often worse than losing a parent, particularly when those kids are extremely close, when there might be violence in the family, and the only way that they can have any solace is by comforting each other. So that is another issue as well, separating kids and the trauma that creates, which is not, obviously it's not the kid's problem. That is somebody else's problem that's creating this, and that would take us down the path, which I didn't want to go down talking about child protection specifically, but certainly that's an area where child protection services are not necessarily putting up their hand and taking responsibility for either. And 100% children are affected by all the COVID BS. Well, Alan, I don't think necessarily it's all BS, but they're certainly affected by the impact that COVID had on them. I read a report the other day that was talking about young people wondering about how their world is going to be, fearful that they will contract this virus, fearful that they may die from this virus, even though children are less likely to. And I don't think it matters about how you describe what happens as a result of someone getting COVID. You can say that it's just older people that are getting it and the older people are the ones dying from it primarily, but that's not true either. There's a lot of other people that have died from it. But even that would be, kids can't sort that stuff out. So certainly they've become distressed by it as well. Anything that happens in the world, kids find it's not just COVID. The impact that climate change may have concerns children. The fact that their world is going to be a different world than the ones that people our age had is a particular concern to kids. And I was talking to my wife about this the other day, that what was it like, I wonder, we were watching a war movie the other day called Birdsong, and we were wondering, what was it like for children to have lived through that period? Not necessarily growing up to go to fight, but to have lived through a time where their country was being bombed, whatever. And then we started to talk about, well, what is it like for kids that live in Afghanistan, or Iraq, or Lebanon, or Israel, or on the Gaza Strip? What's it like for any of those kids to experience that sort of trauma on a daily basis? So we can sit here comfortably thinking that COVID's the only thing that's affecting us, and kids get distressed by that, and we understand that as well. But, there are many other kids that we need to think about around the world who are experiencing all sorts of dramas and who are affected, where their mental health is affected by what is happening around them. And I don't think, what's it like for kids that live in refugee camps? What's it like for the Tamil kids that are on Christmas Island, being removed from the country that's theirs, Australia, and being placed on an island? What's it like for all these kids who suffer a whole host of traumas that we normally wouldn't experience? It must be horrific, absolutely horrific. And I wonder whether sometimes we just ignore them because it's not happening to us. It's a bit like, do we ignore mental well-being issues that's happening to others because it's not happening to us? Do we ignore the fact that kids are sexually, physically abused and mentally abused? Do we ignore it because it doesn't happen to us? Do we ignore the fact that kids get bullied at school because it doesn't happen to us? No one listens to us anyway when we complain about it, and the education system is so stuffed they don't know what to do with it either. Is it because we often feel hopeless and helpless to be able to help other people that we choose to do nothing? And I just think that's wrong. I think there's always something that we can do. One of the things that you can do is you can join the Child Protection Party, because at least we have policies and have a voice. At least we're doing these sorts of live feeds and a whole host of other stuff to let people know how we're going. We've had a fabulous uplift of around 25,000 people in the last 7 days who are listening to us and who are watching some of our videos. So it is something we can do. We can rally together to fight for the change that is required, or we can sit on our hands and do nothing. At least the CPP, our executive, and those people that are members of our party are at least attempting to do something. At least we provide a voice for those people that don't normally have one. We're the only political party that does have a voice for kids. So it's worthwhile remembering that we are the most important political party in Australia because we do care. My wife and I did a podcast in our Conversations Over Coffee. If anybody want to listen to it on Spotify, please do. But it certainly was about the lack of empathy that politicians show towards those people that are part of our community. They feign empathy, but they don't really understand what's happening for kids, for anybody. All they're interested in is political power, their influence, and their income. They are not interested in working hard for kids. We here at CPP are all volunteers. We certainly don't get paid for any of this. In fact, it costs us lots of money. But we do it because we want a better future for our children. We want to be more mindful of what's happening for them. We want to put systems in place that are going to produce better outcomes for all kids. That's what we're fighting for. And that's a massive gap within our system that has never been addressed, because kids don't matter because they don't vote. But we as parents of those kids, or as people that are concerned about the well-being of children, should be putting up our hand and voting. And we should be, I think, joining someone like CPP so that we can have the voice that is required, so that we can give children the voice that is required. And Clinton, who's one of my most favourite persons at the CPP, says visiting a psychologist or mental health social worker should be as normal as walking to see a GP at your local doctor's. And that's so true. You know, I have a number of people who come and see me on a regular basis, been doing it for years, but do it sort of like a mental health checkup. This is where our stuff is at the moment. These are the issues that we're facing. Nothing terribly traumatic, but we just want to have a chat to see whether we're on the right track and address some of the issues that sit in our lives. That's the way it should be. Someone's replying to Clinton says, yes, it should be normalised. Taking responsibility. So, Tony, the public health system is dysfunctional and flawed. Too many years on the wait list before people finally receive the medical assistance support networks they desperately require. Ain't that true? The government does nothing to address and action mental health in society. That's what we're about. And thanks, Tony, for supporting that notion that we do not provide the system that we not. And the reason is, mark my words, the reason why we're not providing it is because they don't care. It's as simple as that. We would prefer to spend heaps of money on weaponry that we will never ever probably use now really overseas, or weaponry on protecting our own country. We will never use it, but we will spend more money in that area, or we'll spend more money supporting corporations who pay so little in tax. We'll spend heaps of money on them, but no money on children, young people in general, and mental well-being issues, which is where we should be focusing. And again, that's why the CPP is important. So Alan says, and I appreciate what you're saying, mate. Totally agree, but it's hard to save and make changes when we get screwed over by our own government agencies. Look, that's true. That's very true. I agree. But, you know, we can sit here and bitch about what the government does or doesn't do until we're blue in the face. We can complain about what other people do and how they affect us. We can be as aggrieved as we like. But if we choose, and if we sit down and we do nothing, then we are getting what we not want, but we're getting what we deserve, frankly. You know, if we sit back, and the reason why we started the Child Protection Party was because I recognised that people were not being, the needs of people who were facing the child protection system were just not being met. They were being discounted. It was abusive. It was just downright abusive, and it was painful to watch. So we set up the CPP in order to deal with that and wider issues that affect kids. Because not just within child protection, but within all areas, children are not heard. They are ignored. They are seen as valueless because they do not vote, because they don't produce an income, because they're not paying taxes. So our job is to ensure that they do have a voice. Eventually they will be voting. Eventually they will be paying taxes. But their mental well-being and how they function in the world is critical. If you have a whole host of young people who just find their way to the unemployment line because they feel so crappy about who they are, they've failed to go and get an education because they've been told they're useless and hopeless anyway. And if we encourage that by doing nothing about it, by not making education easier, by not helping kids to understand that what their true potential is and how they can achieve that stuff, if we're going to sit back and do bugger all, then that is what we're going to get, bugger all. But if we want to make the changes that are required, then we have to take action, right? And it is distressing for me where we've been working at this for 6 years to not have the traction that we need in order to make the changes that we need. So, Alan, with all due respect, complain as much as you like, but you can't sit back. Well, you can. It's unhelpful if you sit back and you do nothing. Absolutely unhelpful. If you believe that this system is there to choke the crap out of you, then do something about changing the system, which you can do. If we had, for example, and this is a long shot and it's a pipe dream, but if we had a candidate in each state in the federal election, number one, people would start to recognise us and start to take notice of CPP. Secondly, there'd be an increased chance that we actually could find a seat or two in the Senate federally. Now, no one knew Robin Mueller was, from the motor vehicle shooters and whatever they are, and he got in on a minuscule vote, and he did nothing while he was there. But he had the opportunity, right? The difference between he and us is that we have a political party behind us that's not just interested in how many motor cars we have on the road and whether or not we all have guns. We're here because we're interested in children and the best interests and outcomes for children and advocating for them. Imagine the changes, Alan, that we could make if we had people that were representing you, that could hear your voice, that could articulate what you're saying and negotiate change. Because if they don't change, if they don't make the changes that we need, then we will fail to support them on the things that they, the other side, think are important. I think that's important to note, because that's the reason why we're here, to make change. Because if no one else believes in us, we do. And just trying to, yeah, thanks, Jackie. If you're not changing it, you're choosing it. I've got to use that quote more often. That's fabulous. And it's so true. So, if you happen to be watching us on YouTube, we broadcast to both Facebook and YouTube. So if you're watching us, please subscribe and like us and ring the old bell and become involved with what we're doing. Become involved with ChildProtect. We've got this next Saturday. In fact, we have our AGM, which we're opening to everybody. So you don't have to be a member to come along. It'll be broadcast on Facebook and YouTube, and you will have a chance to contribute to our discussion if you so desire. The first 15-20 minutes of it will be the business, and then we have a wonderful speaker who's speaking on Parents' Voices, who will be talking at around 2:30 South Australian time. So join with us and become a part of what we're doing. Hear about what we're doing. There'll be president's reports and secretary's reports and treasurer's report, which will be really brief because we don't have any money. But there'll be lots of things happening. So become involved with that. Make a note in your diary that on Saturday, 2 o'clock, Australian Central Standard Time, you will join with us at the CPP for our annual general meeting. If you have any questions or queries about anything that we've said today, and anything that we've said has been worrying or concerning you in some way, I just want to put up these helplines that are available to you so that you can seek the help that you require. If you wish to have a conversation with anyone here from CPP, please feel free to ring Avery or myself and have a conversation with us about taking an active role in the Child Protection Party. Thanks everybody for being with me. We're also asking people to present with us topics to talk about on a Sunday night. We've got another live feed every Sunday night at 7 o'clock Australian Central Standard Time. We invite you to become a part of it. If you want to become involved in this conversation, you can contact me. If you've got a camera and a microphone and you want to engage in the conversation, we can send you a link, personal link to you, so that you can become involved and I can incorporate you in the conversation. So if you want to become part of us, let us know. Look, we're interested in anybody's ideas, providing they are helpful and they're not denigrating and putting others down. We want to be able to make the change that is required for all kids, regardless of where that child comes from. And we need to have your ideas in order to help us to make those changes. We have a tremendously active executive at the moment, the best we've ever had in 6 years. They're doing a fabulous job in pulling this party together and focusing on the things that matter to all of us. So if you want to become part of us, please join. If you want to become part of one of your state executives at the moment, please let us know. We have basically members in each state, and hope to be with you next week at 7 o'clock Australian Central Standard Time. Take care, look after yourselves, and be safe.